So my name is Mary Koshy. I'm an Associate Director in the Office for Diversity and Inclusion. And welcome to our virtual talk series for Disability Awareness Month. We've had, this is our third talk this week, and we have a series of them for the rest of the month. Please keep an eye out for the emails. They're also in the employee and academic update email notifications that has been going out. So it's my pleasure to introduce you to Jonathan Novick. He is an outreach manager. I'm sure he has other titles and hats he wears as well at the New York City Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities. And he's here with us to talk about programs that the Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities have currently going on, as well as the initiatives that has happened during the pandemic and is still happening, and talk about some lessons learned as well. So with that, Jonathan, I'll let you briefly yourself and jump into your talk. So thank you so much for being here with us today. We really appreciate your, the information you're sharing with us and your time.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mary. Thank you so much for inviting me here and having me. Hello, everyone. My name is Jonathan Novick, as I was introduced. I'm the outreach manager for the Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities. So if you're not familiar with our office, the Mayor's Office for People with Disabilities works to ensure equal access to everything New York City has to offer. And that today, we're going to be discussing what that looks like in blue sky situations when there's nothing happening, like a pandemic, but also when the city does need to take greater action, whether it be through emergency management or some other action. We work with our city agency partners to ensure that the disability community is still represented. So over the next 45 minutes, I'm going to be going over information regarding our office, direct programs and services, just so you can be aware that you can refer people that you work with to our office, and what, managing expectations for what that would look like, but also to take you through our experience throughout COVID, what we have learned, what we've set up, the work that we've done, since March, basically, and where we are today. So I'm going to start with an overview of direct programs and services from our office. So we've been around since 1973, and as I mentioned, we work to ensure equal access to everything the city has to offer. So that's housing, transportation, benefits, employment, but, fun things too. Art and cultural institutions, our beautiful parks around the 5 boroughs. We work with all people with disabilities of all ages. So it's not just physical disabilities, it's all people with disabilities. If you want to contact our office, you can call us at 212-788-2830. That's 212-788-2830. You can contact our video phone for folks who are deaf and prefer to communicate in ASL. You can call our video phone at 646-396-5830. That's 646-396-5830. And you can also visit our website at nyc.gov/disability. That's nyc.gov/disability. So for the first portion of this presentation, I'm going to take you through our call directory. When you were to call, if you were to call that voice phone number that I mentioned, you would be given a directory, basically letting people know the services that we provide in order, and elaborating a little bit more on what those services are. So if you press 1, you will reach housing. You can either call that number and press 1 or visit nyc.gov/disability housing. And if you do so, you'll find some information on different disability housing programs that the city has to offer, different benefits programs, finance programs, and things like that. An important note is that our office does not have units to provide. We work with HPD and NYCHA and other organizations, but we do help people with disabilities navigate the process. So maybe one relevant example is if a person with a disability, or perhaps a person with a new disability as a result of an accident or aging, might need to relocate, our office can help with that process and getting you started. So we can assist with finding accessible housing, applying for supportive housing, Medicaid waiver programs, affordable housing set aside. These are in the affordable housing units that are built through the lotteries. 7% are set aside for people with disabilities. These are 5% for people with physical disabilities, 2% for blind, low vision. But all of the units are adaptable for people with disabilities. We have information on disability rent freeze and tax exemption. This is called DRE. and also homeless shelter accommodation requests. So this is the information that our office can provide and assist with getting someone started. Basically, if someone is looking for housing, we can let them know what they qualify for and point them in the right direction based on their age, disability, and neighborhood. If you press 2 when going through our call directory, you'll learn about transportation. We can provide information on the different programs that the city has to offer, whether it be MTA Reduced Fare Metro Card. This is a Reduced Fare Metro Card, exactly what it sounds like. Accessoride, which is door-to-door paratransit service for people who qualify. They can go from one point to another, either from on a singular trip or on a subscription service to go from home to work and vice versa for the cost of only $275 per trip, the same cost as a Metro Card swipe. Disability parking permits. These are permits that are offered. There's 2 different kinds. There's one in the state that you're most likely familiar with. These are the blue hang tags that allow a person to park in a blue municipal space in a lot that is either closer to the entrance or has the empty spaces next to an accessible space, so a person who uses a wheelchair lift can get out and operate their lift safely with enough clearance. And there's also a city parking permit. So within the 5 boroughs, if a person with a disability qualifies for a city parking permit, this is a permit that allows them to park in spaces that drivers traditionally cannot. For example, city parking permit holders are exempt from alternate side parking, as well as certain no standing zones. So these are things that our office can assist you with in applying for. In addition, there's a service called Accessible Dispatch. This is door-to-door yellow and green taxi cab service that is wheelchair accessible. It's not something you have to apply for, it's just something that's readily available. So if there's somebody who is trying to go from point A to point B and is in need of a wheelchair accessible taxi, this is something that you can call at any time. You can either call 311, download the Accessible Dispatch app, or you can go on their website, which I believe is accessibledispatch.com. So you can visit that. So these are an overview of some of the transportation services that our office can assist with, connecting people with disabilities too, but we're also here to address complaints. If you're familiar with Accessoride, you'll know that it's a big service. It's a big operation that does thousands, if not hundreds of thousands trips per day. And sometimes those trips don't go exactly as we planned, and we want to hear about those. So we are open to hearing about complaints if you had a negative experience with a driver or a certain trip, and we'll encourage you to log these complaints, and we'll reach out to Accessoride to ensure that whatever happened, the problem is addressed and it does not happen again. So we're here to provide resources, but also to hear feedback of what's not working. If you press 3, you will receive social services and benefits. Once again, I'm talking about our call line, 212-788-2830, extension 3. We can provide you with information about social services and benefits. We have benefits coordinators who can, once again, point you in the right direction, but are not qualified to directly fill out the process with you or the applications with you. But we do have information on human resources programs like adult protective services, cash assistance, emergency food assistance programs, HIV and AIDS services administration facts, supplemental nutritional assistance programs, and Medicaid and Medicaid buy-in programs. In addition to Social Security, SSI, SSDI, 1619B, and Medicare. So similar to housing and transportation, if a person with disability contacts our office looking for what services they qualify for, we can point them in the right direction for social services as well as benefits. Employment. Our office has a robust employment program called NYC at Work. To reach NYC at Work, you can call our main line, 212-788-2830, and press extension number 4. And you can visit us on our website at nyc.gov/NYC at Work. To put it simply, NYC at Work is a public-private partnership that connects 2 large groups. There is what we call our Coalition of Service Providers. These are organizations that work with people with disabilities, either in a voc rehab sense or in colleges and universities around the city that are preparing people with disabilities to be job ready. And we connect them to our second group, which is our Business Development Council. Our Business Development Council is a collection of businesses, both public and private, that are interested in hiring people with disabilities and have job postings, in fact, to do so. What our office does is we play the role of the convener. We provide professional connections from our coalition of service providers to our Business Development Council and connect them to job opportunities, in which case, in many instances, result in hiring full-time or part-time positions across all sectors. So for folks that are working with us, we offer those connections. Employment opportunities within our Business Development Council, as well as targeted recruitment events held by our employers. These large job fairs that people can attend, go bring their resume, interview on the spot, and potentially get hired. We also have exploratory opportunities. So these are informational interviews for potential careers. If you're interested in cybersecurity or finance or art, you can learn more by sitting down with one of our Business Development Council members. We also have career mentoring days like job shadowing. There's also professional development opportunities that we provide, like feedback on relevant job applications, direct referrals to service providers, job training opportunities, and employer-led skills workshops. So we try and run the gamut to be a general resource for people with disabilities that are looking to either enter or re-enter the workforce. Then we have a program called Empowered NYC. This is through our office and Consumer Affairs. Empowered NYC is free, trustworthy, confidential financial counseling for New Yorkers with disabilities. So this is not a benefits program or it is a financial counseling program. So if a person with a disability is trying to save up for a house or is trying to has a child with a disability and is looking to save up for their college or safely plan for their financial future, Empowered NYC can help with that. Empowered NYC can help with managing supplemental SSI, SSDI benefits, tackle Social Security Administration overpayments, and in general assist to transitioning to work. If you're not aware, a big issue that people with disabilities sometimes face is when they're relying on benefits, there's a certain threshold that if they are working, they can lose their benefits. And this is incredibly scary for a lot of people with disabilities. If they are working, or if they are, if a person with a disability is receiving benefits, even looking for a job or getting hired for even a part-time job, you run the risk of losing your benefits. And it can be a very complex process to navigate. So that's where Empowered NYC comes in to help with that transition. So if you're interested in learning more about Empower NYC, or if you want to provide it as a referral, you can call 311. You can visit nyc.gov/empowerednyc. That's nyc.gov/empowerednyc. Then we have a program called Project Open House. Going back to our directory of phones, if you call 212-788-2830, extension number 5, we have a program called Project Open House, which is a home modification program for people with disabilities. This program is currently closed due to COVID-19, but it will reopen again. And when we do, we will be sure to make a large blast and announcement, so you can keep on the lookout for that. But in a nutshell, Project Open House is a home modification program for people with disabilities. It is a federally funded program that renovates, that finances home renovation for people with disabilities. The eligibility requirements for this program are you must reside within the 5 boroughs, you must have a permanent disability, you must meet Section 8 income guidelines, and we also need permission from the building's owner. So with that being said, home modification can mean many different things. You might be thinking automatically that this is, physical accommodations to assist people who use wheelchairs and other mobility devices, like adding ramps and lifts and accessible bathrooms. And it is all those things, but it goes a step further. We can assist any person with a disability that qualifies for the program, if it's within a reasonable scope of work, by making renovations to increase their independence. So for example, we once worked with a woman who was low vision, who had difficulty getting into her home at night because she was using a metal key and a metal lock. And because it was difficult for her to see, she was having difficulty getting into her home. Project Open House came in and replaced that system with instead an electronic key fob. So she could just swipe into her home, which made it a lot easier and the process a lot simpler. We've also worked with a family that had a child on the spectrum who was nonverbal. We went in and we put a perimeter metal fence around their yard so they could play out in the backyard, and the family could be on the property with a lot more ease, knowing that their child wouldn't run away without anyone realizing, unsupervised, and get lost or get hurt. So this is an example. Project Open House does a lot of work to increase the independence for people with disabilities. all types of people with disabilities and all kinds of renovations. So once again, if you want to learn more about that program, it's nyc.gov/POH, as in Project Open House. And then we also have a program called the ASL Direct Program. This is a direct video conferencing line. So for individuals who are deaf and looking for resources, they can call our office and be connected directly to an information specialist that can provide information in American Sign Language. That video phone is 646-396-5830. That is 646-396-5830. And you can also visit nyc.gov/ASL. And I'm going to pause for a second because I realized I didn't make what is most likely a very important announcement. I will be sharing this PowerPoint with Mary, and Mary will be sending it out to everyone who has registered. So apologies if I've been speaking at 100 miles an hour and you've been trying to write down phone numbers. This will be shared, and we're happy to answer questions also. So just for the record, we will be sharing this. So that's a little bit of information about the ASL Direct Program. Next, we have a brief program I want to touch on called Disability Service Facilitators. And this is just a general resource for you as Mount Sinai to know about, and also to refer to people with disabilities. So in city government, every city agency has what's called a Disability Service Facilitator. And this is a city agency, this is a liaison between that city agency and the disability community. So let's say somebody has an accessibility complaint around Department of Buildings, or Human Rights, or HRA, or NYPD, or so on and so forth. There is a Disability Service Facilitator for that. You can visit nyc.gov/DSF, as in Disability Service Facilitator, and you'll be met with a contact list of specific people, name, phone number, email, and physical address if you'd like to mail them, that have their information posted that you can contact directly. So it's our way of trying to connect people with disabilities more directly to services so they can, you know, better interact with city government. So that is the Disability Service Facilitator. So that's a brief overview of our office direct services. Now I'm just going to talk a little bit about our COVID-19 response. So the following information goes over, you know, starting in March, what we did, what we found to be important, what we learned later, and some of the resources that we set up and that the city has set up as well. So the first thing, and this takes place in March, you know, when everything got real, halfway through March, when the mayor started having press briefings, when there started to be task forces created, the first thing that we needed to establish was that everything that was being said was said in an accessible manner. So first, that meant American Sign Language interpretation and live captioning for the mayor's office press briefings. So early on, when the mayor was giving daily updates on numbers, on programs that were being unveiled, on general city updates, on lockdown procedures, or, you know, social distancing procedures, we needed to make sure that that information was accessible for people with disabilities. You know, I talked about ASL Direct. ASL Direct is an extremely necessary program because a lot of people who are deaf face a large barrier to information. You know, you might think that, oh, if somebody, you know, signs in ASL, that they could just read information or follow captioning. But in actuality, the deaf community, when I said deaf, I mean like capital D deaf, who are born deaf, ASL is their first language, English is their second, at least in the United States. So for this reason, their reading comprehension might be a lot lower, and they might have difficulty getting information and navigating the internet in a way that someone else might. So it was so important to make sure that this information, these briefings, had ASL attached to them. We also needed to make sure that digital accessibility was a factor in all of Department of Health and Mental Hygiene's materials, as well as all the social media correspondence that was going out. There was so much information flying around, and it was also being updated almost on a daily basis. So what are we talking about when we say digital accessibility? Well, digital accessibility means first how content appears. So for folks who are low vision, contrast can be an issue, font size can be an issue, font appearance and things like that. So we needed to ensure that, you know, accessible visuals were being created, but also on the back end, we needed to ensure that digital accessibility or these materials were accessible and could successfully interact with people with this assistive technology as well. So for example, a lot of folks who are blind or low vision use what's called a screen reader. And it sounds like this.
Page 2 of 3. Adjustable doc. Messages. Page 2 of 3. Page 2 of 3.
So basically, it's an audio description, or sorry, so sorry. Assistive technology, like a screen reader, is beneficial for folks who are blind or low vision who cannot read traditional text. They can, using assistive technology, listen out loud to content on a screen. But unless that content is created appropriately with accessibility in mind, they cannot interact with this information. So it was important that we, were speaking with and communicating with the content makers that understood digital accessibility, so everyone could be included and everyone could reference these materials. In addition, we needed to make sure that we were engaging directly with the disability community, which is why we started having weekly meetings with the disability community. So we called them weekly MOPD COVID-19 calls, very original name. We did this over Zoom. We every week had representation from Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, of course, to talk about the latest policies and numbers, emergency management, to talk about some of the city's more comprehensive responses, like their hoteling program, some of the food services that were being set up, as well as HRA to talk about some of the benefits adjustments, emergency SNAP, and things like that. We also had guest speakers depending on what was relevant. When the MTA was making shifts, Department of Transportation, the Get Food program, different services and issues as they came up, we tried to address them in the next meeting by having the policymakers and community partners there to talk about their services. But most importantly, we needed to hear from the community about what we were saying. You know, how is the Get Food program working for you? Have you been to these pickup sites for food? Are you able to get around okay? What services are you looking for? So we could understand what we as a city could do better. And all of these calls had both American Sign Language interpretation and CART. ASL is something that I think you are familiar with. This is American Sign Language, like I was speaking about before. But there's also CART. CART is basically live transcription. So for somebody using, I could talk about this later, actually. It's live transcription. And this is for somebody who is hard of hearing, who might have difficulty listening in, and doesn't know ASL, but can read captions as they come up. So over these discussions, these were some of the immediate issues that popped up to us, and then some of the resources that came as a result. The first huge concern was access to medical care, specifically fear of rationing care due to disability. Early on in the throes of March and April, when we were still not peaked yet, we weren't sure what that was going to look like, and we were looking for PPE everywhere we could find it, masks, gloves, locations, having to set up facilities outside of hospitals to respond. There was a fear, and it percolated in different parts of the country, that people with disabilities would be turned away. It was going to be a snap decision between, a quality of life for a person. So a person with a disability would end up in a hospital and be, taken off of a ventilation system to be given to somebody else. We had seen court cases bubble up, I think, in places like South Carolina, other states like that. Eventually were overturned, but that was a huge concern. Not only in terms of like the conversations that were coming up, but in some of the places, not enough pushback publicly. It just seemed to be these issues were coming up and nobody was necessarily pushing back. So, luckily it never came to that when it came to, people with disabilities, at least within New York City. But it was important for us to put that out there and discuss with human rights what to do if somebody is discriminated against because of their disability. Contact human rights, report this discrimination, so on and so forth. So it was important for us to, quell that, but also to let human rights know and other agencies know that this was a big concern. Another concern was losing home healthcare providers for a few different reasons. So first, when PPEs were in such short supply, some people were losing their home healthcare providers because the healthcare providers did not feel safe coming into their homes. They didn't have the protection that they needed, and they wouldn't for a little while. In addition, you know, when some of these exemptions started coming forth, for example, when I don't want to call it a travel ban, I forget exactly how this was phrased, but when essential workers, basically, when there was the line drawn between essential workers and non-essential workers, home healthcare providers were initially not spelled out as essential workers. And there was a lot of questions about whether a person with a disability would, or their healthcare provider would be stopped on the street because they weren't deemed essential. That was something else that we need to work toward to make sure that that was included in the messaging. And then, of course, lack of access to PPE and accessible PPE. So our office was able to luckily work with DCAS and set up a PPE delivery system. You know, as time went on, there were those pop-up sites, and I think now we've seen more face mask availability. There's, you know, the market has sort of caught up. But MOPD does have a disability, a delivery service for PPE for individuals who require it and they cannot leave their home. So if you're interested in referring this to somebody, you can visit nyc.gov/disability-PPE. But in mass, we were able to deliver a lot of face masks to our disability service providers that we worked with, whether you know, individuals that housed people with disabilities or independent living centers across the city. We were able to connect them to resources. And something that still persists today is clear face masks. So an additional issue for the deaf and hard of hearing community is that with this new world that we are living in, face masks are a huge detriment to communication for individuals who are deaf and hard of hearing. So it's not just about the lips, it's not just about the mouth and lip reading, but people who are deaf rely on lip reading and facial expressions and emotion a lot when it comes to understanding and communicating successfully, either within the deaf community or between somebody who is deaf and somebody who is not. So clear face masks are an incredibly important factor. So our office has been able to distribute some clear face masks around to deaf and hard of hearing organizations. But I would, you know, put it out to you to look into clear face mask providers. You know, if you are treating individuals who are deaf and hard of hearing, you know, in your facilities, and of course PPE are necessary, having clear face masks on hand to access for individuals who are deaf or hard of hearing are going to make a huge difference between, you know, having safe communication that still works for people with disabilities who are deaf and hard of hearing. So those are some immediate concerns that came up in terms of the medical space. An additional concern is access to food and supplies. So, you know, with everything shutting down, people with disabilities afraid to leave their homes. There were some programs that popped up through New York City. There's the Get Food NYC program, which was delivering meals starting from just one meal a day to, you know, a handful of meals or like a week's worth of meals that was set up, which was facilitated through, I believe, sanitation department with TLC delivery services. There's also meal pickup at over 400 Department of Education schools that was available for anyone. These facilities were not all accessible, but the word got out, or, you know, we instructed or made sure that there were people standing at the doors able to, you know, deliver these meals to people with disabilities who cannot get in the facility, as well as meal delivery for seniors. But in addition, what we saw were nonprofit volunteer organizations pop up as well to address the need. Invisible Hands Volunteer Services, who delivered not only food, but pharmaceuticals to people with disabilities and seniors within their own homes. A lot of stores started creating hours specifically for seniors and people with disabilities so they could shop in a social distance way that was safer, so they could get the food and the services that they needed. And also organizations like Mutual Aid Society, which is a nonprofit or a community organization that basically, depending on the neighborhood, has almost like a message board to assist vulnerable populations, people with disabilities and seniors in bringing them food and services and other things like that. Then we also heard a lot about mental health services as well as domestic violence concerns. So as far as mental health services go, we do have a list of mental health services available on our website. These are not just the standard ones that you might have heard of, like NYC Well and the New York State Emotional Support Helpline, but also services set up by disability-specific organizations like Lighthouse Guild of the Blind, for the Blind, some services set up by deaf organizations, so individuals who are deaf can receive counseling in ASL, and just general wellness tips and PDFs that we put on our website as well. There was, as well as like various support groups. So we have information on that on our website, which we had put together and built out as we learned more. But another big issue and concern was domestic violence. This was a big topic of conversation when we were in the heat of, of quarantining, that people with the, that just people in general who were in a domestic violence situation were trapped within their own home because of, limited access to the outside world, to other people, and were just face to face with their abusers. And actually, for people with disabilities, this is some of the biggest percentage of where domestic violence can come from, because of the sometimes hostile and disproportionate power balance between a person with a disability and their caretaker, whether it be a family member or a friend. There can be instances of domestic violence and abuse, which is where a really good organization comes in, called Barrier Free Living. So Barrier Free Living offers comprehensive support services for survivors of domestic violence with disabilities at its fully accessible Barrier Free Living Freedom House domestic violence shelter. They have award-winning Barrier Free Living Secret Garden domestic violence counseling program, as well as apartments that offer permanent homes with support services to survivors with disabilities and their families. So this is a service that's based in New York City specifically to cater to individuals with disabilities who are seeking shelter due to domestic violence and resources. So I included the website in this presentation. So I encourage you to check that out as well, and keep that on hand as a resource for individuals with disabilities, just in case you have a conversation or they're looking for somewhere else to go that, maybe isn't their own home. So some of the things that we learned, a lot of, I just want to pull this up. So I linked to some things directly and some things not. So I'm just gonna sort of go to a new screen. Give me one moment. Sorry, okay.
You might have to stop share, Jonathan, and then.
Yep. No, I just needed to pull up the page specifically that I was looking for.
Okay, great.
Okay, so do you see this new web page here?
Yes.
Okay, so some of the things that we learned could be very well encapsulated in this resource page that we have up and will continue to have up and update, which lays out disability specific information. We didn't try and keep up with all of the health practices. For that, we refer people over to the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene page. But for information on food and supply delivery services, for information on social services and Medicaid benefits, home health care provider organizations, clarification on the governor's executive order when it came out, different organizations that were still accepting new clients if someone needed to get a home health care provider, testing information, updates on accessible transportation, and so on and so forth. So this was information that we put together and are continuing to put together. So if you have time, if you want to look it over, we recommend you do so. So these are some of our biggest resources that have come out of COVID, both from the city side, from the nonprofit side, all put together in a comprehensive format, in an understandable format for people with disabilities. So that URL, if you're interested, is nyc.gov/disability-coronavirus. And there's also, so that's nyc.gov/disability-coronavirus. So that is a big takeaway of resources that we learned of what was available for people with disabilities, and in a categorical sense, what we found was most important: access to food and services, access to healthcare, access to home health care providers. Then we also learned a lot about digital accessibility. And in a positive way, a lot of what we learned was the possibility of digital access. Over the past few months, we have been learning to work together from home. We have become second nature to hosting these virtual events and presentations. And as a result, a lot of cultural institutions and activities were forced to go online, which if we had to pick out one bright spot, at least for the disability community, enabled a level of social interaction that was not there before. There's a really good article, I think it might have been the Washington Post, that highlights a person with a disability being able to participate in theaters, in live performances, in concerts, and things like that they were never able to do before. So our office, we put together MOPD virtual activities toolkit that, at least in New York City, highlights a lot of activities, live shows, museum tours, home activities, health and wellness exercises that are adaptable, ways that people can, still engage with the outside world in a positive way that are accessible for people with disabilities. But we also learned that there are, with this in mind, virtual accessibility precautions that can be taken. So we've created the MOPD Virtual Accessibility Guide, which lays out from an electronic perspective how to ensure that people with disabilities can be included in the conversation as well. In this guide, and this is, once again, this is hyperlinked in this I will share with Mary. It lays out, what platforms are accessible for people with disabilities, what are not accessible for people with disabilities, how to set up accommodations like ASL interpretation, and what's the etiquette for that, live captioning, how can it be built into the program that you are using, whether it be automated or live, how to facilitate, RSVPs and, procure that accessibility information. So this could be particularly helpful in providing telehealth services. So for individuals who do have a disability, who are fearful of coming into your office or unable to walk outside right now, this could provide you with some good background in how to provide accessible telehealth services via Zoom or whatever medium that you might use. But we also learned, unfortunately, that contrary to all of the great digital access that we have created, not everyone has access to this digital space. Many people with disabilities, unfortunately, do live in poverty, do not have access to smartphones, to laptops, to internet access that can open these doors that have been opened for many other people. So it's important that we recognize that this is still a barrier that we need to address, and that when you are providing these meetings, these services, that keep in mind that a phone number can still go a very, very, very long way. And someone might prefer to call in or only have the capability to call in because of their either lack of access to technology or lack of comfort with using technology. So that is, I'd say encapsulated of what we learned. And this is what we recommend. Acknowledge the needs of people with disabilities. And I mean this in a few different ways. So first, when you are putting out guidance, when you're putting out kinds of protocols and practices that are being put in place, include people with disabilities in this messaging. One of the things that we heard, or one of the frustrations that we heard early on, was that there seemed to be no guidelines for people with disabilities. A lot of what we heard was vulnerable populations. And there's a lot to dissect there, I suppose, but I think the biggest takeaway that I would recommend that you do is include a place for people with disabilities to engage with you, to make sure that their concerns of inaccessibility and insecurity that you might not be aware of are being taken care of. So what a good way of doing that is including a few lines of communication in your practices, your protocols for intake, for telehealth services, for phone consultations. And that's something as simple as writing out what kinds of accommodations you have that are present, what kinds of accommodations, so whether it be American Sign Language interpretation, video conferencing, phone consultations, but then also a point of contact to request additional accommodations. For example, a phone number, an email address, or both. Having an extra line in an intake form that states, please let us know if you have any additional accommodations or if you'd like someone to reach out to you. This way, You'll know if somebody is deaf and you'll need to work with a video remote interpreter. You'll know somebody is has difficulty or is blind or low vision and might need additional verbal guidance in getting into your facility or getting to your facility. But also additional things. This is, you know, it can be somewhat of a hot topic, but one thing that we have also learned is that not every person can wear a mask, unfortunately. You know, masks are beneficial and important for stopping the spread, but for certain people with disabilities, whether it be respiratory disabilities that when covering the nose and mouth have difficulty breathing, or a person who, let's say a child who's on the spectrum or somebody with a developmental disability is extremely fearful of the mask, still needs medical attention but is unable to wear it. These are conversations that you know, need to still be worked out. Everyone does still need this medical attention, but there needs to be a platform and a line of conversation where you can connect with the patients and try and come up with a way that works. What I have highlighted is the MOPD meeting notice guide. So this is rooted in a local law that was passed a few years ago, but it basically lays out how we recommend as a city that you include accessibility information in your advertisements. And very simply, it's, as I mentioned, a point of contact for accommodation requests and a list of accommodations that you already have present. So I highly recommend you check that out. But also, we want you to ensure that all of your communication materials are accessible. As I mentioned before, for somebody who is blind or low vision, making sure that your website is accessible, that the forms that you can fill out are accessible. And we have a slew of digital accessibility resources on our website that go over website accessibility, document accessibility, social media accessibility, video accessibility as well, with captioning and audio description. So I recommend you take a look at that as well. And just make sure that in all the information that you are sharing, that you're taking the time to ensure that people with disabilities can experience that information in the same way. And our office, we do workshops, you know, we do presentations, and we also do reviews. So if there's somebody that you're thinking about right now who should be in on this meeting isn't, connect us, connect me, and I can connect you with our digital accessibility coordinator who can walk you through more of the process of what are some standards you need to build into your communication so that people with disabilities can get the information that they need. So a lot of what I talked about, direct services and COVID, is outlined in our AccessibleNYC report. So if you're interested in learning more about what our office does, you can visit nyc.gov/AccessibleNYC. That's nyc.gov/AccessibleNYC. In it, we go over information on housing, transportation, access to city services, health, education, employment, and financial empowerment. All of the projects that we're working on and policies that are coming down the pipeline to increase access for people with disabilities in New York City. This year's version is going to talk a lot about COVID. It's going to talk a lot about what we did, a lot of what works, what doesn't work, and the resources that we are hoping to carry with us moving forward. But with that being said, that pretty much covers everything that I wanted to go over. So I just want to reiterate our contact information. If you want to call our office, you can call us at 212-788-2830. That's 212-788-2830. You can call our video phone for information for someone who is deaf and needs information in ASL. This is specifically for city services. You can call 646-396-5830. That's 646-396-5830. You can also visit nyc.gov/disability. And if you want to reach out to me, you can email me at jnovick@cityhall.nyc.gov. That's jnovick@cityhall.nyc.gov. Or you can call me at 929-291-8670.